So you might be wondering, why would I talk about Final Fantasy 16? This game came out like 2 years ago, why are you talking about it now? And I would say this, well, for one, don't put me in your box. I'm gonna talk about whatever I want to talk about. I mean, do you know how expensive it is for a small YouTuber like myself to only cover new games? Like, come on, I'm gonna cover other stuff. But more importantly, and honestly, why I talk about it is because it did release for PC recently, and I believe it's gonna come out for the Switch and for Xbox at some point. I mean, we've already heard that Square wants to work with Nintendo more in the future, and that they're already planning to put FF7 over on the Switch too, so I imagine FF16 is going to make its way over there as well. And now that, again, FF16 is on PC, I'm sure it's also going to hit them Microsoft consoles as well. But also, I would say, like, this isn't a full review kind of experience. Yes, I beat the game and thoroughly enjoyed it, even got through the DLCs, which were also awesome. But it's more about appreciation. So if you've played this game, you can understand what I'm talking about. I will try to do my best to not spoil anything in the game. In fact, there's only one slight thing I think that I might talk about that some could argue would be a spoiler, but I don't even think so. It really just has to do with the icon fights, and we already know that they're in there, and icons are the summons, by the way. But yeah, we already know that you can play as Ifrit and control summons during these like big battles. So anyway, that's the only thing I might touch on that would be a little spoilerish, but again, I don't think it's a big deal since it's already alluded to in the trailer. But anyway, what I really wanted to talk about though is how this game, I think, single-handedly saved the Final Fantasy series. Now, I don't mean Final Fantasy as a whole, because Final Fantasy XIV is a beast. It's a monster that's just going to keep going. And I believe they would have moved on to doing more remakes, and they still possibly might. I'm heard they'd have some stuff going on in that regard, but it would be the death, I think, of a new Final Fantasy, a new numbered Final Fantasy anyway. Because when you look at the critics and what people say, Final Fantasy has sucked for the last 25 years, which is crazy when you think about that. And I guess for the context of this video, it'd be like the last 23 years, whenever the game came out. But you get what I'm saying, it's 2 decades of suckage, and at some point the company just has to pull the plug. And if you look at it, a number of people have had nothing to say but bad things about the Final Fantasy series. Yes, I think the last good one, and by the way, it's not my opinion, this is just a mix of being around when like Final Fantasy 12 came out, and I remember being so hyped for it, and everybody I knew hated that game. I remember being on the forums and seeing all these people's thoughts on it, and I still was like, no, I don't trust that. I gotta have it, because I had just beaten Final Fantasy X, and I have a ball with it. I love that game. I was like, how can it drop off so dramatically? So I remember specifically, bugging my mom, please buy me Final Fantasy 12. I need that. I don't care what you need me to do. I'll mow the laundry. I'll wash the yard. I don't care. Whatever it takes. And getting it and being like, yeah, this kind of sucks. To be clear, as many people have also revisited this game, it has actually gotten better. So I think Square was just maybe a little ahead of themselves or something. We weren't ready for that, but as people have played it again, the reviews and thoughts on it definitely have aged well. But then you talk about Final Fantasy 13 and everybody hated that game. It was just a mess, and I think we were even more mad because they dug in on it. Now we're gonna do Final Fantasy 13-2 and 13-3, and at the same time, that's all we were getting. Well, paired with Final Fantasy 11, which was also not good, although I will say that they kind of dug themselves into a hole, but they kept digging and they discovered oil, because that, like I said, had turned into Final Fantasy 14, which is when I was kind of thinking, like, okay, is this just an MMO game now? Like, are we done with the actual numbered Final Fantasies? And for quite a while, it felt like that. Everybody who played Final Fantasy XIV is, like, in love with it. And myself, I spent thousands of hours in that game. It was wonderful. And yeah, Final Fantasy 15 did come out, but it kind of failed too. It really was one of those games, I think it had so much hype around it. In fact, there was a movie to kind of introduce it, and honestly, the movie, I think, is better than the game. Really good, actually, if you get a chance to check it out. But even more so, the game was okay. It was actually pretty decent until it just dropped off. It was like they gave up on it. They put all this marketing stuff out. They planned all these DLCs. All this stuff was going on, and then they just, like, stopped. And so, really, at that point, and when it fell apart, I was thinking, like, I think we're just done with Final Fantasy. I think it's going to be be Final Fantasy 14 or Realm Reborn or Realm Rediscovered or whatever. I mean, a lot of these DLCs for 14 were coming out and were incredibly popular and just incredibly fun. Like, this may be the natural transition for Final Fantasy, is now it's just an MMO. And honestly, it kind of made me sad. But don't get me wrong, I loved Final Fantasy 14. In fact, even thinking about making this video, I thought, well, maybe I'll just boot up my account and just get some screen grabs from the game, but I don't want to do that because I think I would just be sucked right back in and you guys would just forget I existed. Like, I'd just be gone. It is that addictive and fun, but it's also a huge time sink. And honestly, I missed a single player storytelling type experience that you got from Final Fantasy in general, and how Final Fantasy 2 or 4 is arguably one of the greatest games I ever played and really got me into RPGs in general. By the way, side note to make all you retro guys just sick, my first experience of playing it was on my iPhone. So, unfortunately, I know I didn't have the original experience and never will. I think the game is really hard to find, but I ended up playing it on my iPhone and I was like, this is amazing. And it had me digging into Final Fantasy 7 and 6 and 8, like 9, of course, like all those games. Tactics became this incredibly great game, and it had been like long past. And in my era, it was Final Fantasy 10, which was good. It was really good. And of course, after that, the games I just mentioned. So I wanted that back. Yes, the MMO is cool and you could play with your friends, and I still remember being so excited for Heaven's Ward and fighting a giant dragon and all that cool stuff, but it wasn't the same, and it did feel like something was missing. But it went on for years before we heard about Final Fantasy 16, and finally, when it came out, they did the unthinkable. They listened to their audience and gave us a game that we'd been screaming for years, decades literally. Their audience had grown up. We had grown up. We wanted Game of Thrones, not Blue Dragon. Yes, Blue Dragon's a cute, fun game, but honestly, things have changed. It's 2023 by then. We want blood. We want political intrigue. We want sex. We want the whole thing that we get from like Game of Thrones, or even now other RPGs, or even The Witcher. I mean, there's so much content out there for older, mature RPG fans, and yet Final Fantasy just wasn't going along with it. So I think Final Fantasy 16 did the amazing job of taking this gigantic step forward while also keeping true to itself. And what I mean by that is, one thing I think a lot of Final Fantasy fans are going to recognize is Ifrit and Shiva. For forever, they have been implanted in the Final Fantasy world. Even if they're not your favorite summons or icons or G-forces or whatever you want to call them, they're always there. And by putting them to be represented by the two main characters in Final Fantasy 16, I think was an incredible stroke of genius. Not only did that sort of tie in this whole entire world, and again, I'm not going to go further into that because it's going to ruin things, but it also made us feel nostalgic and remember just how important some of these summons were. And they were. In those older games, the summons were incredibly important. They played huge parts in the game. And it was like, as the game started going more sci-fi, and as they were kind of trying to create another Cloud, they just gave up on some of those aspects of the game that I think we truly got in Final Fantasy 16. Is it a perfect game? No. I think it has some of the worst side quests that a side quest can side quest. It literally is awful with no storytelling whatsoever. It's, hey, go get this, go do that, you're done. And that's fine. Honestly, it's fine, because what they did give us, though, is a pretty big open world to explore in, and a really great story. I mean, really cool hunts. I don't want to forget that, because that's an awesome part of the game. But really, we hadn't seen a story like this. We hadn't cared about these characters, or any characters, I should say, in a long time, like we did about Clive and Jill and Joshua, Barnabas, the deep-seated political games that like Queen was playing, and the multiple kings who are kind of taking her word for everything, and just how deep the game really goes. It's just amazing. I don't want to get too far into it. But on top of that, you also had Clive as one of the most powerful characters I can think in modern or recent times of actually using in any Final Fantasy game, or many games in general, which I think is really cool because, yes, the game can be tweaked to increase the difficulty so it's not too easy for you, but honestly, you're able to use the power of gods And so wouldn't it be bad or kind of silly if you have all these powers that were given to you by these multiple powerful icons, gods, whatever you want to call them, and yet like just a random enemy could easily kill you? Like, it would just be ridiculous. So it was cool when you're running around and you're fighting these enemies and you're just destroying them and you're using all of these abilities and these attacks, and yes, some of them I would prefer to have a little more control over when you use them, but it's still such a fast-paced, high-octane kind of combat that it is just so enjoyable. Not to mention that you also got magic back again, which has not been something that's used in a long time in the series. There's just so many good things for this game to build upon, and I hope that enough people will see those as incredibly strong, positive things moving forward. If this isn't the Final Fantasy that you want it to be yet, it has to be a lot closer to you than Final Fantasy 15 was, or 13. It's got to be closer because it is so much better. And honestly, for me, I think it's one of the best in the series. As I look back at it, and I think about some of the big epic battles, like the one you have with Bahamut in this game, some of the stuff that goes on with the Queen, your mom, and all this kind of stuff that happens. Again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but at times it really does feel like Final Fantasy's version of Game of Thrones. We got so many cool things about it. The intrigue of the storytelling, as I've said multiple times, the combat being so high octane and incredibly fun. Also, being able to level up your character and do some of that stuff, crafting, create your own weapons, find ultimate weapons, and even the DLCs themselves, which at first I was kind of irritated I had to pay so much for them, but after experiencing them, they were worth it. But ultimately, I think we're looking at a situation where Square was saying, okay, enough's enough. We don't know what we're gonna do. We will just try this. We're going to try to go all in like the consumer wants us to, with more modern touches of blood and political intrigue and, you know, sexuality and all that, while going back to medieval times, or at least the perception of medieval times. And it was almost like a Hail Mary. Like, if this works, great, but if it doesn't, we're done. I can't say that for sure. I have no inside knowledge at all, but it just felt that way to me, because it was like after 20 years, they finally gave in to what most of us wanted, and it felt like they were doing this out of just a last-ditch effort. And, you know, again, I don't know. I could be completely wrong. Who knows? Maybe in a decade or so we'll read an article about it. It's just my thoughts on what this felt like. And as a fan, how much this game really did change a lot. And I hope that enough people recognize that, purchase the game, support the game, so that we do get a Final Fantasy 17 that has enough care and attention like this one did. So, I don't know. It's just my thoughts about Final Fantasy 16. If you can't tell, obviously I give it an incredibly high score. I would give it about a 9 out of 10. The only reason I say it wouldn't go much higher, I mean, and if I could totally break it down, I'd be like a 9.4, but it's just the quests. As I said, the side quests are not good. They're kind of horrible, but there's so much actual game content and story content within that, and even the hunts and some of that stuff, that you're already looking at an incredibly long experience. So you don't really need the side quests. They do help, especially get certain items and materials and things like that. So if you're really trying to 100% the game, or get like the best weapons, the best armor, or whatever, yeah, okay, there's a point for it, but it really doesn't expand the story at all. Anyway, though, that's just my thoughts on Final Fantasy 16. Please let me know what your thoughts are down below. Are you a fan of Final Fantasy in general? Have you played 16? What are your thoughts on it? Am I right, wrong, whatever? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on Final Fantasy and RPGs in general, and specifically Final Fantasy 16. But also, if you stayed this long, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this kind of video, I like making these a little bit more than just traditional reviews. So thank you for supporting me and hanging out for the entire video. But anyway, thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate you. Love each and every one of you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.